1984, The White Book by Makavelli, Vice versus the Apocalypse. This is episode 15, part 1. We are doing this in a 4-part series because 1984 has far too much material to cover in a single video. So I am breaking it up into 4 parts. While this book can be read by many, it will only be understood by a few. There are many prerequisites to every chapter to understand, and there are many for 1984. And I think the way a lot of people hide the knowledge and keep it to themselves is useless. The majority of people wouldn't even know what to do with the information if you gave it to them anyway. So I think we should all share the information together, because I've encountered quite a few people along this journey that have pieces to the puzzle. And they've shared them with me, and I've shared my pieces with them. And I feel like we all have separate pieces to the puzzle. And so none of us should feel too arrogant that we've got it all figured out. The rabbit hole is the Grand Canyon. Once you start finding stuff out, you're going to find it's not just a little bit. There's a whole lot of information that is hidden in plain sight. And for those that have been watching this video series exclusively for Tupac, this book is bigger than Tupac. It's bigger than hip hop. This might not all make sense for you right now, because you came for Tupac and you want your Tupac. But hopefully this all might start to click someday, and you'll see how grand of a story this is. Because this isn't just a story. This is conspiracy theory, dot connecting, and trying to make sense of everything. It's amusing to me whenever I see negative reviews or negative comments about the White Book, because it clearly demonstrates to me that these people have not read the book. And again, I can't give enough credit to the author. It's not just the information that the author knows, it's the way that this is all being connected together. All right, let me stop wasting time. Let's get into the 4 parts. As I said earlier, 1984 is going to be split into 4 parts. So there'll be a 1984 part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. They'll all be released at different times. So part 1 is going to be Reaganomics and the Cold War. That's this video. Part 2 is going to be about AIDS, and it's excerpt 25. Part 3 is going to be the greatest story ever told. And part 4, I'm currently naming Miami Vice, Voodoo, and Supreme Sacred Stuff. I may change the title later on, but that's the title for now. Vice versus the Apocalypse plot structure. So the 1984 chapter is called Vice versus the Apocalypse, and it begins with a recap of the state of the United States in 1984, Reaganomics, etc. There's a scene with Amaine's farewell because she is moving away with her rich international husband, showcasing the differences in lifestyle of various socioeconomic classes and how the upper middle class and upper class have a hard time believing conspiracies against humanity occur. So what I'm saying is, you see the difference in lifestyles of those that have versus those that don't. So Emaine's getting married to this rich guy, and they're going off to this great land far, far away. And they invite b.i.g's mom, Gaia, over, and she's realistic about it. She doesn't have money to do that. It's like they both came from the same place, but opportunities and choices and whatnot are drifting their lives apart. There's a scene with Paul and Thomas having a Bible discussion, and that'll be in the Greatest Story Ever Told chapter. And then there are 4 lunch periods, and that's going to be the part 4 Miami Vice and the Voodoo Sacred Stuff. Characters for the 1984 chapter: Gaeta, Emaine, Samantha, Donna, Marcella, Paul, Thomas, the boy, A.D., Malik, Victor, Othello, Christopher, Parrish, Arthur, Bill, Jermaine, Wyland Vandelay, Phil, and Corey. Cultural references: Chablis, Asti, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the songs Relax and War, Xenon, Madonna, Robert Mapplethorpe, Pfizer, The Patriot Newspaper, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Studio 54, Mr. Magic, Andy Warhol, Nielsen, Marley Marl, GlaxoSmithKline, Reaganomics, Order from Chaos, Please Santa, Send Me a Rich Man for Christmas, The Agency, Invisible Government, Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, The Insiders, The Mud Club, The Establishment, WBLS, Walter Mondale, Run DMC's song It's Like That, CFR, Jesse Jackson, George H.W. Bush, Dynasty, Falcon Crest, Dallas, GQ, Miami Vice, Lionel Richie, Limos, Ferraris, Caddies, Double R, Park Avenue, and Daytona Spider. And now that all that preliminary stuff is all taken care of now, 6 minutes in, we are finally getting to the actual subject matter of this chapter. Reaganomics and the Cold War, 1984, Part 1. Reaganomics. On the surface, economically, Reaganomics refers to supply-side economics, trickle-down theory. These theories hold the view that decreases in taxes, especially for corporations, is the best way to stimulate economic growth. The idea is that if the expenses of corporations are reduced, the savings will trickle down to the rest of the economy, spurring growth. Prior to becoming Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush coined the term voodoo economics as a proposed synonym for Reaganomics. Voodoo will be a recurring theme this chapter. What Reaganomics means to conspiracy theorists and rappers. It means selling drugs in America to bankroll secret wars in Central and South America to destabilize communist regimes and fight international communism, aka the Cold War, as well as arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan versus the USSR, aka Russia. Also tied into this is the Iran-Contra missile scandal that will come to surface later on with Ollie North. What Reaganomics means to the Republicans and Democrats. It means widespread tax cuts, decreased social spending, increased military spending, and the deregulation of domestic markets. These are all things that Republicans love and all things that Democrats hate. Democrats felt that Reaganomics only helped the rich. Generally speaking, Democrats want things that are more consistent with advancing socialism and communism, and Republicans want things that are more consistent with fascism, and that is the marrying of corporations with government. That'd be fascism, and socialism, communism, would be the government controlling everything. Yeah, pick your poison. They both don't sound good to me. But to gain a historical context for 1984, the end justifies the means. So if we're going to be giving props to Tupac Makavelli and Niccolo Machiavelli, let us realize that Niccolo Machiavelli is credited with saying, the end justifies the means. So in this type of mentality, sacrificing drug users to win the global Cold War may seem like a price the establishment was willing to pay. And it worked. The U.S. won the Cold War. So we could say the crack users and Rick Ross, Highway Ricky Ross, helped save capitalism. And let's examine some Tupac lyrics from Dear Mama.
I hung around with the thugs, and even though they sold drugs, they showed a young brother love. I moved out and started really hanging. I needed money on my own, so I started slanging. I ain't guilty, cause even though I sell rocks, it felt good putting money in your mailbox.
I'm bringing this up in a lame way of just saying, because Reagan takes the heat for the whole thing, the Reagan administration, but it's not like drug dealers weren't getting paid. It's not like it wasn't an opportunity to make a lot of money. And then if you take that money and turn it into positive, as Biggie said,
I went from negative to positive, and it's all good.
So maybe, just maybe, Reaganomics. No, I'm not going there. I'm just trying to have a flip side of the coin. I'm a habitual coin flipper, a habitual devil's advocate. When things are always pointed one way, it's like, hey, come on. There's two sides of this. It's not like just one group got paid. A whole lot of people got paid. And I think someone just wrote a book about it, how the trickle-down economics is like the drug game. You know, the boss man has the big brick, and then he breaks the next guy off, and then it keeps that brick keeps getting broken down further and further down to the nickel sacks. Anyway, take all the most recent stuff I just said as a joke. I just made it on the fly. One of the topics we talked about last chapter was the introduction of drugs into neighborhoods. And there was a film that came out in 2014 called Kill the Messenger. And so if you want to see a recent movie about it, see Kill the Messenger, and it's about Gary Webb. Gary Webb's now dead, but somebody tipped him off to the whole CIA crack cocaine controversy. And then he put out his magazine called The Dark Alliance. Dark Alliance. I think there was a Star Wars video game called Dark Alliance. But yeah, Gary Webb made The Dark Alliance, and that really took the lid off of all of this information. And he's like the key person that broke it open, the whistleblower. So it's worth seeing. And I bring that up because after I made the last video, some people were concerned that I had mentioned the drugs in the neighborhood. And I'm like, look, there's a movie about it. It's a big Hollywood film. It's like everybody's afraid of some big bad wolf. Like we live in Soviet Russia. We have free speech. And the majority of the stuff I'm talking about has already been revealed. Along this whole journey, I've had a whole bunch of people like, oh my God, I can't believe you're talking about this. And it's like, dude, it's not like I'm not the whistleblower. I'm just reporting on what I heard. I'm a lifetime conspiracy theorist. From my interaction with most people my age, it's clear that most people don't have a background on economics. I'm not calling myself an economics major, but I have taken a few courses and I like to educate myself on it. Some of these terms are known as the Laffer curve. It has to deal with taxation. I'm not going to get into it, but if you're interested, look up the Laffer curve and hear the argument for it. The argument may be propaganda in support of the rich, but there seems to be, and this dates back to the ages of kings and queens, that there's a certain amount where if you tax people, you actually get less money. The Republicans like to use that because Republicans are in favor of lowering taxes and Democrats are in favor of hiring taxes. So the Democrats are fairly skeptical of the Laffer curve and the Republicans are in favor of it. Then you have monetarism. Monetarism is usually associated with Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was the economic advisor of Ronald Reagan during the Reagan administration. He won a Nobel Prize and he's considered one of the great economists of our time. Then you have Keynesianism. Keynesianism seems to be the economic model based on John Maynard Keynes that we have been following in the United States for quite some time since post Great Depression. And it deals with government spending when times are bad, and it encourages spending. It says, in the long run, we're all dead, so why not spend all the money? Circular flow of money is important. That money's got to never sleep. And both parties have utilized Keynesianism because it's letting the good times roll. It's letting the money flow. And there's no responsibility because if things go bad, hey, there'll be some government bailout, government stimulus. So it would be good for you to learn about Keynesianism, monetarism, the Laffer curve, just so you have a background. And once you start this economics journey, it becomes a real fascinating thing, especially if you take courses in macroeconomics and microeconomics. A lot more of the world will make sense and you'll be less duped by politicians of both parties once you understand the factors involved. Because it's like they expect you to be ignorant nowadays with some of the stuff they said. Anyway, a great economist of our time that's currently living still, and he is the heir to Milton Friedman's knowledge. He was like his greatest pupil, is Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell, when I was ignorant, and I'm not saying that I'm a pro now, but there was a period of time where I was fairly ignorant to all things economics. A wise man once offered me a book called Basic Economics, 3rd edition. And he said to me, it's clear that you do not understand the role of prices. And this book could really help you out. And so I read Basic Economics, 3rd edition, and it profoundly impacted my life. Shortly after I read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and Ron Paul was going through his presidential campaigns and running and starting the Ron Paul revolution. So if I could offer up Thomas Sowell to anybody, it's about free market economics. It's not about socialism. Right now, socialism is super cool right now. Everybody loves socialism. Everybody loves Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders and bringing socialism. But that may or may not be the answer. It's economics rap song. Educate yourself. There's a song. It's called Fear the Boom and Bust. And it's a battle rap between a guy playing John Maynard Keynes and another guy playing F.A. Hayek. And it's going, and what makes the song so good is that both of their arguments are powerful. And there's also a sequel to it. I don't know if it's called Round 2, More bottom up or more top down, the fight continues. It's a really good song. Even Rap Genius has it broken down on their site, line for line, so that might help you out if you don't have an economics background. I keep going back to this song as I learn more and more things, and the song gets better and better and better every single time I hear it. And when I say the song, I mean both of them. I listen to part 1 and part 2. This song can offer you such a perspective on the duality. My company's called Dual Legacy, and it's because there's always these two opposing views. And when it comes to economics, you have Keynes and Hayek. When you have politics, you have the Republicans and Democrats. When you have hip-hop, you had the East and West, Biggie versus Tupac. So the song is magnificent. Just type in Fear the Boom and Bust. There'll be a link in the description. It's on YouTube. I love the song. I gave it to a few friends of mine, and they didn't have a vast economics vocabulary, and the message was kind of lost on them. But if you want an intelligent song, and it has a large budget behind the creation of it, the audio sounds great, the music videos are fantastic. So Fear the Boom and Bust, check that out to expand your knowledge of economics. And you might think, what does any of this have to do with anything? Well, this chapter, if it's about Reaganomics, Reaganomics is an economic model. And so I'm taking this opportunity to introduce you to some economics. Economics runs nearly everything. Politics, if you think about it, really is a battle of economics. How are we going to spend the money and who's going to get it? And this chapter is about the Cold War. And the Cold War was a battle of ideologies. It was a battle of free market capitalism versus socialism and communism. So some other economists you could look up are John Maynard Keynes, F.A. Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Karl Marx, Adam Smith, and also Federal Reserve Chairmen Paul Volcker, Alan Greenspan, and Ben Bernanke. World War II, the Cold War. This chapter discusses World War II, the Cold War. Revisionist history blames the United States for spiking the football on Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Dresden, Germany at the end of World War II. The USA dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, one in Hiroshima and another 6 days later in Nagasaki. Dropping these bombs to end the war is estimated to have saved 10 million lives by ending the war before a full-out ground war needed to take place. If there was an invasion, there would have been many more casualties for both sides. Japan punched first at Pearl Harbor, although you can argue that the U.S. was provoked. Japan punched first at Pearl Harbor, although you can argue they were provoked by FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. But I believe the actions the U.S. took at the end of the war was the U.S. demonstrating that if you mess with us, you will pay severely. So for mainstream non-conspiracy history, Japan punched first, and the USA made them pay after they woke the sleeping giant, and also put the finishing touches, spiking the football in Dresden, Germany, at the end. The conspiracy version is that international bankers funded both sides and profited severely off of war and having people kill each other for their profit. Hitler Makavelli. The Soviet Union then made their own arsenal during Project Paperclip and Operation Paperclip, where the Nazi scientists were divided up between the USSR and USA, and the rest of the Nazis were evacuated to South America, Antarctica, and the dark side of the moon. Adolf Hitler, like Tupac Shakur, faked his death and probably didn't die until 1994. There is a book and a documentary called Hitler in Argentina, and it's even appeared on the History Channel. Nuclear winter. 40 years into the Cold War between the Bear USSR and the Eagle United States of America, the war of words reached a standoff. The chapter presents all of the nuclear winter doom scenarios, Armageddon, Fallout, etc. Purple Rain came out in 1984. And this is how we got the title, Vice and the Apocalypse. The Vice part was for Miami Vice, which comes later on, and the Apocalypse was all of the Armageddon scenarios presented, and apocalypse scenarios. Strategic Defense Initiative. Star Wars program. SDI was the Star Wars program to defeat the evil empire, aka Russia, USSR. The chapter calls it SIDS, I've always known it as SDI. Not sure if that was a typo. But it included laser-mounted satellites that would blast missiles out of the sky before reaching U.S. airspace. The U.S.-USSR secret alliance was really to defeat extraterrestrials. And I made a video about this after reviewing William Milton Cooper's The Secret Government document that he made. It's on my channel. I'll put a link in the description below. But people are told that the system didn't work and was discontinued, and that being the Strategic Defense Star Wars initiative. They're told that the system didn't work and that it was discontinued. And if you believe that, you believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Yeah, the weapon systems are phenomenal. They've weaponized space, weaponized the moon. And you don't have to ask me, just ask Paul Hellyer, former Prime Minister of Canadian Defense. He's made a lot of videos about the weaponization of space. There's 2 videos on my channel that further detail this. Again, they'll be in the description. The largest stockpile of weapons in USA history was created during the Reagan administration. Pentagon spending peaked at a rate of $34 million per hour. And this was to outspend the Soviets because we knew we could outspend them because the dollar was no longer pegged to gold and hadn't been since 1971 when Richard Nixon took the dollar off of the gold standard. And so now it was just the petrodollar. And the Federal Reserve said that they could spend as much money as they want. They just can't guarantee purchasing power. So we knew that we could outspend, and we being the United States, I know I have an international audience. The United States knew they could outspend the Soviet Union, and they did, and they won. Russia's war with Afghanistan. This war stretched Russia thin over 4 years, and KGB agents were on a mission to destabilize Nicaraguan governments. While Russia fought with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who were trained and armed by Reagan's teams, the CIA seized the opportunity to turn the tide of the Cold War. The Stinger missiles made their way into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban's hands. South American Sandinistas were armed and were called freedom fighters. The CIA smuggled drugs into the USA to fund these operations. The establishment made tons of money by being lords of war arms dealers. The masses watched and waited on a hero. I need a hero. It's amazing how revisionist history sees USSR as the victim. In Rambo 3, Rambo helps the Mujahideen to fight the Russians, and Troutman says, "This is your Vietnam." Not to Rambo, but to the Russian guy. We all celebrate when Tupac says,
Try to make them understand my plot to get richer, much bigger than 6 figures.
But we get mad when Reagan and all them have their plots to get richer, way bigger than 6 figures. 1984 by George Orwell. When I first saw that this chapter was coming up in my readings, I was really excited because I thought this chapter would have a lot to do with 1984 by George Orwell, because it was the 1984 chapter, even though 1984 was published in 1948. There was one reference, and I only found one reference to 1984, and that was the mention of doublespeak. But I think 1984 is the most important book for all conspiracy theorists to read. Actually, for all Americans, all people on planet Earth to read, because it's the blueprint to enslavement. But more important than the story of 1984, there's a book within the book of 1984, and it's called The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism by Emmanuel Goldstein. And it's what the main character Winston reads when he joins the secret society. And you only get to read 2 chapters from it. It's chapter 1 and chapter 3. But it is the most important book you could read to understand how and why things are the way they are, how the whole mechanism works, and why. So Orwell gave us the blueprint, and most people will think it's the actual book 1984, which has a ton of information in it. But the book within the book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism by Emmanuel Goldstein, who's a fictional person, that's what you want to focus on. And it's available online. I'll put a link in the description so that you can read it. There's nothing more important to read. There's nothing more revealing than that book within the book. 1984 concepts. Everything in 1984 is pretty much real and happens now. I don't consider the book as fiction. If you read it, don't read it as a fictional book. I'm pretty sure George Orwell wrote it to warn people. He wasn't writing it to create a great work of fiction. It was intentional. So some of the concepts in this book are the memory hole, which is the manipulation of history. The memory hole, if there's something that's inconvenient for the establishment or the powers that be for it to be out there, it goes into the memory hole and gets vanished. There's so many things of recent times that have just vanished down the memory hole. Like eugenics. There's so much eugenics, history of eugenics that has just gone down the memory hole. Everything that the Nazis did, like all their experiments, gone down the memory hole. Tons of memory hole. The Civil War. There's so much information about the Civil War that's gone down the memory hole. The War of 1812, completely down the memory hole. So that's the memory hole, is erasing history. And now that everything's digital, they could just do a Control F, find and replace, and just replace everything with whatever fits, whatever the current propaganda is. Thought crimes, thought police. So your thoughts are monitored, and there's thought police. And it was demonstrated in the movie Minority Report, the Department of Pre-Crime. Big Brother. Big Brother is probably the most famous term to come out of 1984. And Big Brother is the total surveillance state that we live in that was described by Edward Snowden. But everybody knew about it before Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was probably a limited hangout. But that's another story. Newspeak, INGSOC. INGSOC stands for English Socialism. And Newspeak is kind of like, think of political correctness. The Ministry of Truth. Everything is doublespeak here. So doublespeak is where you say one thing and it means the complete opposite. So the Ministry of Truth was the department of the government that created false propaganda. The Ministry of Love was in charge of punishments. The Ministry of Plenty was making sure things were known to be scarce. The Ministry of Peace was in control of the military. So we can look at some of these things now as national defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the war on drugs, Planned Parenthood, and the best one, the Affordable Health Care Act, because it's not affordable. But yeah, scarcity is the most important thing in our world right now, artificial scarcity. We're led to believe that things are scarce and not abundant. But we live in the universe where everything is abundant. In the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism, there's a section about, and keep in mind it was written in 1948, where Orwell says that the machines exist so that no man should ever have to toil ever again. But these machines won't be used to help liberate mankind's spare time. They will be used to create an inflation on productivity, because we can't let people have free time, because if they do, they'll be able to see who's pulling the strings, or they'll be able to realize that they won't need the elite. So instead, we'll just keep people busy, and that the reason for war isn't necessarily to lower the population, but the primary reason for war is to destroy manufactured goods so that there will never be a surplus. Because if there's a surplus, then peace could break out and people could be stable. You have to keep the world in an era of scarcity and perpetual war. And that we will pay the smartest people in society to become the engineers of weapons of mass destruction. Because if we let the smart people off to themselves and not offer them incentives to create weapons, they'll create inventions of plenty so that everybody can have, and everybody can have good lives. And that can't happen. The last guy to do that was our Buckminster Fuller, and he's coming up in a future slide. But artificial scarcity, if anybody starts talking about that and realizing that we live in a world of abundance, all of our lives on the planet could become better, because we live in a world of artificial scarcity. And to understand what artificial scarcity is, think about your cell phone bill. You get metered. You only get like 2 to 3 gigabytes of data per month. Like, that's enough. and 500 minutes. Why does there have to be a cap on that? And why do the overage charges have to be so high? Books like 1984, Animal Farm, Brave New World, and by the way, in Animal Farm, which is also written by George Orwell, the same thing happens where Napoleon, who's the head pig, when the animals, they all try to construct a windmill, and a windmill is representative of free energy. So they're trying to create a windmill to power their barns so that their barns could have light, electricity. And every time they're about to fully construct the windmill, Napoleon, who's the head pig, stages a false terrorist attack and blames it on his political enemy, Snowball. And then the animals have to go back to work and rebuild the windmill. Animal Farm is known for its famous line, "All pigs are equal, except that some pigs are more equal than others." And this is Orwell warning people about the fallacy of socialism and communism. While it's preached to the masses that it's a form of equality, ultimately there's a central planning board and there's pigs that are more equal than the rest of the pigs. And that you really don't have equality. You have the aristocracy of pull, or just an aristocracy and the rest of the people that have to work. Then you have, and also keep in mind that Orwell fought in all 4 different armies. He saw communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism, and he had something to say about all of them. Brave New World. Brave New World is by Aldous Huxley. It's often compared with 1984. It's another version of the future, whereas 1984 focused on physical suppression. Brave New World talks about drugging the world to keep them passive and easily controlled. And if you look at the world, everybody thinks it's awesome to get high. And the Chronic came out, and drugs are so cool. It just makes you passive and easily controlled. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. This book, you just gotta find it to believe it. It's amazing. It's supposedly a fake book, but the knowledge that's in it is worthy. It shows you how to control populations, and it shows you the psychology of how to control populations and how to get people to go to war, and it's basically how to control populations. The Report from Iron Mountain, I mentioned this one in a previous video. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. I have to send a disclaimer, because a lot of people get mad when you reference the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. I am not anti-anybody. I'm just anti-control. I don't care who the book is about. I omit that. I just take the concepts of how to control people that are described in the book as the knowledge, and that's why I promote the book. Just leave the ethnicities and the nationalities out of it and take the concepts. Even if the book is fake written, the concepts still matter. And you can't deny the concepts. I'm not with anti-Zionism, and I'm not with Zionism. I'm independent. I don't care. I don't want to control anybody. I just don't want to be controlled. And that book is important if you want to learn how we are all being controlled. Rebuilding America's Defenses. This is a paper that was written by the neoconservatives, and it's the blueprint for the past 15 years, starting from the year 2000, 2001. It blueprinted and told you exactly what was going to happen. I have a video on it on my channel, so it'll be in the link in the description below. Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. Bill Clinton supposedly was a student of Carol Quigley, and he referenced Tragedy and Hope in one of his speeches. Tragedy and Hope is so vast that I couldn't even explain it to you right now. Just know that there's a few pages in there that just have so much info on them, and it reveals secret societies and names them by name. It's a pretty interesting book. I haven't read the whole thing. I've only read parts of it. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. This book describes how the Federal Reserve was created at Jekyll Island, and it's written in code just like the White Book. I haven't read it, but I've heard so much about it, and it's amazing that I haven't read it yet, but it's often listed as one of the top conspiracy books. Fundamental Laws, a report of the 68th Convocation of the Rose Cross Order, 1916. I read parts of this. I might have to read it again now that I have a better lens. It's just on there because it's often listed. I'm not really endorsing it. Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. Before there was Alex Jones and InfoWars, Bill Cooper was the alpha conspiracy theorist. Behold a Pale Horse is the book that every conspiracy theorist reads first. It's like how he gets his cherry popped. The virgin tinfoiler. Everybody reads Behold a Pale Horse first. Somehow it makes it into everybody's hands as their first book. And then you go from Cooper to David Icke and then to Alex Jones. Cooper also wrote a paper called The Secret Government, and I did a video review of it. It's on this channel. I'll put it in the link below. Bill had his own CIA called the Citizens Intelligence Agency. He had a show called The Hour of Our Time. He advocated for people to start their own radio stations, newspapers, publications, websites, TV stations. I remember he yelled at an audience. He had primarily like right-wing conservatives and libertarians in his audience, and they always blamed the liberal media. And he goes, you know what? Stop blaming them. You know, those guys own that radio, that TV station. Start your own. I started my own. And so he was a revolutionary that showed the way, much like Tupac showed the way. Where he would talk about, Tupac used to say, make the song for the ladies. The guys will buy what the women want, and that's how you get the money. And Bill Cooper said, hey, make your own publications. Publish your own piece. Publish your own information. And when you own it, you could control it. And so I thought that was... And I always felt the same way since I was a kid. I never wanted to be on TV. I wanted to make TV. I never wanted to listen to music. I wanted to make music. I didn't want to read books. I wanted to write books. So Bill Cooper's drive... I understand it. He also had a lot of enemies too, and he publicly threatened the government on his website. In fact, he had a website at the very beginning. There was a time where the World Wide Web just came out. And actually, I think he had sites even before the World Wide Web on the BBC, the BBSs. But yeah, so he threatened the government publicly, and he went out in a blaze of glory versus the government, where they shot him to death on his front porch, and they refused ambulances to take him. So I think he went out like Tupac wanted to go out, in a blaze of glory. So here's the Bill Cooper, often misunderstood, but I knew where the guy was coming from. His tactics probably weren't, by today's standards, appreciated, but he was fighting for freedom in his own mind. Say what you want. Most people just talk about it. Bill Cooper actually did things about it, and he did everything he could for what he believed in. So he's a real martyr. Just like, if Tupac had died, he's a martyr. But Tupac's alive, so it doesn't matter. But Martin Luther King, all those guys that died for the cause, and Bill Cooper died for freedom. So here's to you, Bill. And you guys should check it out. If you want to be a conspiracy theorist, it's the best first book to read. It's what got everybody started. Everybody, when you start meeting enough people, you're going to find this is the first book they read. And what's amazing is how this book got published and distributed. Cooper once mentioned how it got so vastly distributed, but I forgot who it was that distributed it. Propaganda by Edward Bernays. I had the Dead Prez album, Let's Get Free. It was one of their first albums. It had the hit single, Hip Hop, It's Bigger Than Hip Hop. But at the end of the album, there was a song called Propaganda. And that song at the time was just amazing. So I listened to it. And in the song Propaganda, there's lines like, tell me who got control of your mind, your worldview. Is it the news or the movie you taking your girl to? And now that I think about it, on the song Hip Hop, the guy says, who shot Biggie Smalls? If we don't get them, they gonna get us all. But he doesn't mention Tupac. He just says Biggie Smalls. That always kind of struck me. I was like, man, he just points out Biggie. I mean, is it like an East-West thing? I don't know. But yeah, so there's Propaganda by Dead Prez, but Propaganda by Edward Bernays is even more interesting. Because Edward Bernays, well, let's see here. I learned about Edward Bernays from a documentary called Happiness Machines, produced by the BBC. I should have learned about Edward Bernays when I was in college, because I went for mass communication, but I never did. Although Edward Bernays is known as the father of public relations, and he said that, and there's a video of him saying this, he says that He originally called it propaganda, but because propaganda had a negative connotation because of the Nazis, he just flipped the word from propaganda over to public relations, and everybody was okay with it. So what that tells you is that public relations is the art of propaganda, the art of deception. The first lines of the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays is the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And this was written in 1928. Edward Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he worked in Woodrow Wilson's creation, the Committee on Public Information, and saw firsthand how the public's mind can be manipulated. Wilson was elected on a peace platform, and then he had to transform the country to go to war, World War I, against the German Kaiser. Bernays later helped publicize the American Tobacco Company and is credited as the father of public relations. So anyone interested in understanding how the masses are molded by the powers that be must read this book. And you could see how this relates to 1984, and this actually predates 1984 because this is 1928. 1984 was written in 1948, 20 years later. So the mass deception, just think we're almost 100 years in the future from 1928, like 90 years in the future, 87 or whatever. They've been manipulating us for nearly a century. And if you're not interested in knowing who's got control of your mind, your worldview, is the news or the movie you taking your girl to, then you're just asleep. And this white book is all about being awake. They got us fighting for our spirit and minds. You got to check the song Fighting by Goody Mob. It's from their first album, Soul Food. Just listen to CeeLo's verse. Ignore the rest of the guys, but CeeLo's verse. As an individual and as a people, we are at war. But the majority of my side got their eyes open wide, but still don't know what we're fighting for. I guess that's what I'm writing for, to try to shed some light. But most of us been in the dark so long, we ignore the voice in our head when we hear it. The enemy is after your spirit, but you think it's all about your mind. So Grunch of Giants is by R. Buckminster Fuller. It stands for the Gross Universe Cash Heist. Now, R. Buckminster Fuller is the guy that designed the Epcot ball. The Epcot ball might not mean much to you, but I live in Florida. Epcot's in Florida. And to me, that's my favorite monument in the United States because R. Buckminster Fuller is one of the greatest people to ever live. He gave all of his inventions to mankind. And in this book, Grunch of Giants, he calls out all the powers that be. And he says, I invented all these inventions that could help liberate mankind worldwide so that everybody on Earth can live with the lifestyle of a billionaire. But there's a small group of people that want to keep all this technology suppressed and let everybody still live in poverty. So he says with his own hands and his own projects, he invented the future and we're not allowed to have it. It's all about freeing your time, and they keep you occupied with the monetary system that you have to go to work 40 hours a week, which never leaves you time to think. You work, they plot. You don't have free time, but they do, and they use that time to plot on you. So instead of talking about let's bring in socialism or capitalism or the Democrats or the Republicans, talk about getting free time and ending artificial scarcity, bringing technology in like 3D printing, alternative energy, free energy, over unity, perpetual motion, 0-point energy. Everything so that you could be self-sufficient, independent, make your own energy. That's how you get free. Grunch of Giants by R. Buckminster Fuller. Quite a book. It's a short book. It's like 88 pages. Has so much knowledge in it. And it gives you a first-hand account of what could be. In essence, he's talking about a breakaway civilization. All these things have been invented, and we know this from the 1984 book that was written in 1948, where Orwell said everything's been invented, just not implemented. And so they've had it for over 80 years. There's a movie that came out now called Tomorrowland, where it shows you a breakaway civilization utilizing off-world technology. There was a movie that also came out this year called Jupiter Ascending. It's by the guys that made The Matrix. And in Jupiter Ascending, there's a breakaway civilization, and these people could live past 14,000 years old. They have tons of suppressed technology that they have and the people of Earth don't have. So demand the suppressed technology, because that's what will liberate you. Seek out knowing about the breakaway civilization. References on page 157 that I initially thought didn't match. It mentions Raising Hell, and I thought that had to do with Run DMC's Raising Hell, but that didn't drop until 1986. It mentions a mass murderer stalker was released from prison. And I thought, well, the famous mass murderers at the time were Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Unless, of course, the Raising Hell and the mass murderer was referring to AIDS. And that's the next part in our 4-part video series of 1984. So sub this channel and be on the lookout for 1984 Part 2. Check the links in the description below. It's probably even more important this time than all previous chapters. There's tons of links that lead to other things. And consider that we're at like 48 minutes right now. And this is just 1/4 of the video. Now, I branched off into a lot of concepts and topics, but I think all those topics are what's needed to read the White Book, because I know there's a lot of context that's not known. And you can see that this took me a week just to do this. So you can imagine how long this video series just for 1984 is going to be. There was even more stuff that I had for this, but my throat is killing me right now. I've been talking for 48 minutes. So I'm just going to leave those for future videos. But if you made it this far into the video, thanks for hanging with me. I'll see you in 1984, episode 15, part 2, where we will discuss AIDS and present the lengthy excerpt 25.